Greetings, cinephiles. Are you looking for a movie analysis podcast that stands above the rest? Then look no further than Collateral Cinema, the only movie podcast that matters.
We analyze good movies, we analyze bad movies, and yes, we also analyze the in-betweens of the world of cinema.
So if you like what you hear, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
And listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
And yes, my friends, we are 420 friendly. So when you listen to us, smoke it if you've got it. And now, here's a new episode of Collateral Gaming. The show starts right now.
I'm Ashley Chancellor.
And I'm Beau Maddox.
And this is Collateral Gaming
With
Collateral Cinema.
Welcome to Collateral Gaming, the only video game podcast that matters, where we focus on good games, bad games, and everything else in between in the world of gaming. We are podcasting straight from somewhere in South Texas, and yes, my friends, we are a 420 friendly podcast, so smoke it if you've got it, whatever you've got.
Whatever you have. I mean, if you have flour, if you have wax, or if you have blunts, well, I mean, whatever, man.
Thank you, Beau, again for being on this episode. We are talking about another retro PS1 title, and we will definitely get into it. I mean, first of all, happy spooky season, everybody.
Yeah, happy Halloween to everybody. Happy spooky season. We already kicked it off on Collateral Cinema with the Human Centipede and everything, but now we are kicking it off on Collateral Gaming properly, with quite possibly one of the most iconic survival horror games of all time. I almost said movies. I forgot what podcast I'm on. But yeah, this is good survival horror. It's like the original, you know?
Hell yeah. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about, if you didn't check out the episode title for some reason or whatever, Resident Evil 2, and we'll also be talking about the Resident Evil 2 remake in the next part of this episode, so stay tuned for that. But for this particular feature-length episode, we are going to be talking about the original 1998 video game that helped... I mean, if the first game defined survival horror in a lot of ways, the second game just really takes it to a whole different level, which we'll get into. But I did want to kind of hit some of the more recent news that's been going around in the world of gaming.
Excellent.
So, namely, actually, and a little bit relevant to what we opened up this season, the Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier mobile game is being shut down. It is actually going to be seeing its end of life.
Wow.
Yep.
Man.
As of January 11th.
Wow. I mean...
After, I think, just over a year?
Yeah. I mean, it's not that uncommon for these types of services and, you know, these service-type games to go offline from time to time. But, man, it's like, that's something I never even knew actually existed, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly. It is, well, and see, this game is actually kind of a battle royale type. I tried it out. It's just, that's not really my thing. I would have liked to play a little bit more, and I guess I can before it closes in January, but it's in the world of Final Fantasy VII, and, you know, it's a mobile game. It's a battle royale, so if you know how those games play, that's basically what it is. You know, and with them launching another mobile title, I think sometime this year, which is actually going to be a turn-based RPG style, covering the events of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, that's Ever Crisis, you know, it probably didn't get the feedback that they hoped it would.
Probably not. I mean, that's usually how it works out with these sort of things.
Didn't meet expectations, whatever.
Yeah.
This month, we're also getting a Resident Evil Village DLC, the Winter's expansion. I would like to talk about that in some form or maybe do a commentary. I'm kind of still working that out. And that's if I'm able to purchase it, which, you know, my financial situation's it's a little off at the moment. But if we can, then, yeah, I definitely have to talk about it because Resident Evil Village is a lot of fun. And we're going to talk about, you know, the Resident Evil franchise as a whole, kind of, especially this month. As for Other news, we did get some gameplay for the upcoming Dead Space remake, which I'm very excited about, and another look at Gotham Knights, if you care about it. I mean, I don't know. It's just like, it kind of reminds me of the Arkham series, but it's not.
Yeah.
And you can tell.
Yeah, for sure.
So, whatever. We'll see how that goes. But, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, there really wasn't a lot going on this month to talk about.
Doesn't sound like it. I mean, for the most part.
No, but it is spooky month, so yeah, it is the perfect time to delve into the world of survival horror.
Yep, we're back into the world of survival horror, needless to say.
Yeah, once again, you have stepped into the world of survival horror, or you have stepped back into the world.
Exactly.
Something to that effect. Yeah, so Resident Evil 2, the 1998 original video game developed and published by Capcom, and the sequel to the original Resident Evil.
Oh, man, I love the original Resident Evil, let me tell you, especially the director's cut, which has a very interesting story behind it as well, especially regarding its soundtrack. Mm-hmm. I think Wayne did a video on it recently, so yeah, check that out.
Yeah, and that may be something we may be addressing this month, because I'd like to do a bonus round actually talking about Resident Evil Director's Cut in particular, because I've played through a little bit of that, and I actually played through Remake as well in preparation for this podcast, the remake of the original game, and we'll definitely get into that at some point, if not now.
Yeah,
but yeah, Resident Evil, as a whole, I think has defined the survival horror genre, and no better than the way that the first game did. What I like about Resident Evil 2 is that it takes that and it kind of digs in a little bit deeper and tries a couple other things, and just as a game plays better. I want to say the first game does the survival horror genre a little bit better, but like Resident Evil 2 overall, I think, as far as gameplay goes, is a better game.
Well, you have to remember with the first Resident Evil, it was really going for atmosphere more than anything, because it was emulating, old school horror movies and zombie movies. I mean, it was trying to be like a real, like, gamified version of Night of the Living Dead or Day of the Dead or something like that. But I mean, with Resident Evil 2, I mean, it has those elements, but you have a little bit more of that Twitch gaming action vibe to it in some areas.
Yeah, it does definitely feel a little bit more action focused, and I mean, personally, I kind of prefer the classic Resident Evil games like 1 and 2, and the more recent games being like Biohazard and Village, because they're games that focus a little bit more on the survival horror rather than the action aspect. But I will say, yeah, I think 2 is just a little bit more action focused, whereas 1 is a little bit more puzzle focused.
And that's not to say that there isn't some really horrific shit in Resident Evil 2. I mean, there's lots of body horror in this game, as well as
tons of it,
as well as a lot of gore.
Yeah, no, they don't hold back with the gore. It's just a shame that the polygonal models aren't going to capture that as well as a modern game might. But no, still wandering through the halls of the RPD or some of the other locations and seeing the blood everywhere and debris and looking at the bodies, in particular the zombies. They don't hold back with it. I think that the concept, the atmosphere of the mansion is just slightly superior, but where Resident Evil 2 takes an edge, I think, is executing that environment. I mean, I definitely felt like the graphics in Resident Evil 2 have been improved. They're a little bit more detailed than the first game, and as well as the design of the environments, because, even sections of the RPD feel a little bit more distinct from each other than the mansion did.
It really does. I mean, it's almost like it layered, these floor plans from different, levels and everything, different games, and just kind of put them all into one. And that's kind of what makes RPD so iconic, I think. I think even more iconic than the Spencer Mansion to a degree. I mean, not to say there isn't parts of that fit that role, but, to me, I mean, just expanding the actual, surrounding area of the game itself, into the city, and then also going to the RPD, it's like, I mean, that just makes for a more memorable, first 20 or 30 minutes of the game, or even like the first couple of hours.
Yeah, and so I think where this game excels is not only we were initially just addressing the RPD and how, distinctive the RPD feels and not as ad nauseum as the mansion, and that's not even talking about all of the other environments that you go to, because this game does have, a progression from, the streets of Raccoon City to the RPD to the parking garage to the sewers, back to the RPD and then, back down to the sewers, fully explore, and then to the lab. And so roughly half the game takes place in the Raccoon Police Department, but the other half of it is these other areas of the game. And so it definitely adds a lot more flavor. The environments are even more distinctive because you're going to different places, whereas there were definitely different segments of Resident Evil 1, it was all on the mansion grounds. So it all kind of was samey,
I think that's what really makes Resident Evil 3 really great as well, is because that expanded even further on Raccoon City itself. You don't spend as much time in the RPD there. You're actually going to like the city park. You're going throughout the streets of the town. You're going to different buildings and everything. And that's here to a degree, but, I kind of get why they placed most of the game in the RPD, though. Because, you needed to have a little bit of that central location, because that's kind of what, Resi fans were accustomed to from that first game.
And RPD is honestly the best part of the game, I think.
Yeah. It was about having that one central location where everything just went down. There's a lot of similarities between the two places, but as far as just atmosphere and as far as just real tension, it's like RPD is, I think, the superior location.
Yeah, I think so. And if we had just an entire game set in a bigger RPD, that would be fine as well, because, just aesthetic-wise, it works. And I think that Resident Evil 2 is a good middle ground, because with the original Resident Evil, there is something that you gain by locking everything down to the mansion grounds, as you're isolated. You're in this place, just this one team, and they're all getting picked off one by one. It definitely creates its own atmosphere that way, and Resident Evil 3 kind of, takes the progression from the past two titles to its logical extreme and has you basically able to walk the streets a little bit more and gives you a little bit more of an open flavor. Although I haven't played any of 3 myself, just from what I've seen, but Resi 2, I think, kind of is a good middle ground between those, because you do go to different locations, but you do also sort of have that central location. And even whenever you move on to other ones, you're in that area.
Yeah, getting back to the RPD from, say, the sewers or anything is really not that difficult. It's all really interconnected that way.
Yeah, and you can pretty much go back and do whatever you want. And you will, because originally, the first time you go down to the sewers, you do a little bit, and then you come back up to the RPD, do a little bit more, and then you go back down.
Yeah.
Or actually, no, that's not correct. It depends on which character you're playing as and which scenario, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense, honestly.
That's another thing that is very distinctive about 2, and something that is one of the only things I dislike about the remake, which we'll talk about that next part, but I think in a lot of ways it actually expands and improves on and is a better game overall for what it does than the original. It does what a remake is supposed to do, except for how it treats arguably one of the most iconic features of 2, which is the zapping system and the A-B scenario. And I'm going to talk about my disappointment with that in the next episode, but as far as the original game goes, something that really set it apart from, for instance, its predecessor, and hasn't really been replicated in any Resident Evil title since, or I can't think of any game that kind of works this way, is the idea that your different character scenarios were not just alternate versions of events, but you would actually have a B scenario where you would play as the other character, and it was, so for instance, if you chose Leon, in the B scenario, you'd play as Claire. If you chose Claire in the A scenario, in the B scenario, you'd play as Leon. And in that B scenario, it would actually be what the other character was doing, and they would meet each other at the same locations that you went through in the A scenario. The other character would go fight the bosses that they were supposed to. Any items that they leave behind and don't take are available for you, or at least a couple of them, or they can take those.
Yeah. I mean, and it's very difficult to understate how influential that system was to later games on down the line, you know? I mean, that was such a new concept, was, you know, being able to, you know, like transfer your save file to the next game and then, you know, like have like different, you know, items and everything. I mean, that was just unheard of before then, you know?
And there was interconnectivity, and there was an actual communication between both scenarios. They existed together. So it wasn't, you know, you pick Jill or you pick Chris. It was you play as Leon and then Claire, or Claire and then Leon, and they actually went on this journey together. And then you can try it the opposite way, and that's going to be your alternate version of events, but it encourages you to actually play all 4 scenarios, and I did. Because I think the replay value is just, again, the first game did a good job of giving you that replay value by, okay, here's the other character you can play as, and here are some other costumes and stuff that you can unlock afterward. But, you know, in this game, they actually doubled that even further and said, you know, here's another way you could do things, and all 4 scenarios are going to be actually a different experience.
Very much so.
So yeah, even the sets of bosses that you're going to fight, you know, within the A scenario and the B scenario are going to be different, because it wouldn't make sense to fight the same character twice, you know, in their same form. Claire will fight G1 and Leon will fight G2.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about the whole zapping system is how the game itself really works in service of it, you know? Like for instance, how the puzzles are constructed and everything, you know? Like, I mean, there's a reason why, and Resi 2 does get a little bit of flack for this, there's a reason why the puzzles are a little easier than they were in the previous game, and arguably easier than they were in other games before them, is because it lent itself to that replayability so that you could just get through each scenario and, you know, not have to do a whole lot of backtracking, because that was a huge thing about Resi 1, was, you know, backtracking was a huge part of that game. Here, you don't have that as much. You have a lot more forward progression.
Yes. And
that really helps balance out the whole zapping system and the whole A-B scenarios.
I think so. And I think, you know, there's just kind of the game lends itself to a better learn as you go. And, you know, you'll have, at first, the RPD, for example, is going to be confusing, and you're not going to know where you're at. But then before too long, you're going to know that place like the back of your hand. And that comes in handy when you play through the B scenario, or whenever you go and play through the other characters' A and B scenarios. You're just going to kind of be able to learn what works in this game. And what's cool is that items are switched around depending on what scenarios you're playing. So, you know, an item that you found in Leon's story is not going to be in the same place that it is in Claire's story.
And then there's also just the different path that you take in the B scenario, like, period, like at the beginning. You know, you have a slightly different intro. You have a slightly different way of getting to the RPD.
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, every experience is going to be different. And even though, you know, you're going to end up repeating some things, especially by the time you might go through the second set of scenarios, it's still going to be fundamentally different, because each character has differences between their stories, but also each A and B scenario has differences, usually in the pathway and what bosses you'll fight. So it's going to be an entirely different experience every time, and I think that's what gives Resident Evil 2 so much replayability, especially over other entries in the franchise, and I really enjoy that.
What I'm looking up right now is I'm looking up the various weaponry of Resident Evil, which, I mean, that's a whole nother topic in its own right, because most of the guns that are used in Resi 2, in the Resi series period, are based on real-world firearms. Like, for instance, I mean, the revolvers, I mean, they're based off of, like, Smith & Wessons or Rugers or whatnot. Like, I mean, then there's even the submachine guns. I mean, there's stuff like Heckler & Koch MP5s, and the shotguns are usually like a Remington 870. But, I mean, they put enough variation into all of those weapons to kind of make them unique to the game.
Yeah.
You know? And also the weapon modifications, like, for instance, on the Heckler and Koch VP70, like that's real life shit. That's a bracelet you can actually put on the gun. It snaps on, and you can get that 3-burst fire with it.
Oh, that's badass. I like that.
I mean, yeah, it was all modeled off of real world weapons, and that was kind of a first in its own right. Like this was before, I mean, yeah, Tom Clancy come out, but I mean that was a little more nondescript with its weaponry. But it's like, I mean, nowadays when you have games like Ready or Not or like Call of Duty, that's very intense on, they're very intensive on what kind of firearms are using, real world, like real world playability and whatnot. It's like this was kind of what laid the groundwork for that. I mean, there's even a YouTube series on the actual weaponry of Resident Evil called the Kendo Gun Club.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's based off. It's really cool, a really cool channel, and he actually breaks down, how they are similar to real world weapons versus how they kind of diverge from them. There's just some subtle things that they changed with some of the weaponry. Some subtle things.
Yeah, and you might need to from a gameplay perspective. But yeah, I always thought that was really cool. I mean, when we were playing, you would be like, hey, pause real quick, and check that weapon. And you can go check it in the inventory, and it'll be a little description of what it actually is. And it was cool to actually, see those weapons and even look up their real-world equivalents.
I mean, and then there's like the most iconic firearm out of the entire game, which is the Samurai Edge, which is a Beretta 92 FS that's been modified.
Yeah.
More or less. It's got a threaded barrel on it. Like, it's modified for greater accuracy. It has better parts as like overall in its construction.
I think that's one of the weapons that you can only unlock if you've played through with a certain rank or something, right? That's one of the...
Yeah, that's one of the unlockables is the original Samurai Edge, which I believe was a standard issue for the Stars team.
Yeah, so it's actually the same one that they had in Resident Evil Director's Cut, the customized Beretta, but they're calling it the Samurai Edge now. I want to say there is a version of Resident Evil, it might have been the DS version that even implemented that retroactively. But I love how playing through the game a certain number of times or getting a high enough ranking is going to allow you to unlock different types of weapons that you didn't have access to. And of course, it wouldn't be Resident Evil if there weren't, infinite rocket launchers and other infinite weapons.
Oh, definitely. I mean, once you unlock a lot of those a lot of those types of weapons and everything, it really just adds a lot of fun factor to the game. Now, I remember when there was a April Fool's Day prank that was, I think it was Electronic Gaming Monthly that played it. They purportedly showed, it was either them or GamePro. They purportedly showed in the Resident Evil 2 Akuma from Street Fighter. He's like the evil version of the evil counterpart to Ryu and Ken. Mm-hmm. Supposedly, he was going to be a playable character if you did a bunch of really complicated shit between the two scenarios and everything. And you had to unlock Hunk and Tofu and everything and all that shit. And you had to beat all of that, and apparently you would get Akuma, and you could even use his the evil Hadouken that he uses.
Fuck yeah.
You could use that just like you would a weapon. You hit the shoulder button, you aim, and then you just...
no shit. That's awesome.
But it was an April Fool's prank.
Yeah.
Though. I mean, and it got people good, because it would totally track that, Capcom would probably put one of their Street Fighter characters as an unlikable character. And I'm kind of surprised that they didn't make a little bit of a joke towards that in the remake. I'm kind of surprised by that. That would have been kind of funny if just out of nowhere, there was maybe a reference to Akuma or something like that.
Yeah, no shit. That is cool as hell. Yeah, I mean, speaking of, you mentioned them earlier. There are even game modes that are unlocked by getting, a high enough ranking, which is determined by how quickly you get through the game. I think how many times you save, things like that.
Yeah, how many times, and also how many times you use first aid sprays. That's also very important.
Yeah,
so that factors into it. I don't know if how many times you use herbs factors in, but
that's good to know. Actually, I'd always just kind of use them interchangeably, but there's a reason to save those first aid sprays and not use them if you don't have to.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you unlock the fourth survivor where you play as another survivor of the Raccoon City incident,
That's Hunk.
Hunk. And then there's the tofu survivor where you actually play as a giant piece of tofu. It's
And the only thing you have is a knife. That's the only thing that he can use is just a knife.
yeah. Yeah. So like these are just kind of more of these like time trial type scenarios where, you know, you actually have a preset items and you can't gain any more, and you just kind of try to get through it as quickly as possible with the items that you're given.
In a way, it's kind of the precursor to DLC in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a precursor to that, you know, these unlockable modes. It's like nowadays that's shit that you have to buy and download in order to even experience.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, so that they definitely, I love how they're adding all these other game modes, and that's all in the game that you get. You know, you don't have to update it, you don't have to buy anything. It came in, and I think, despite the fact that the story is relatively short, I mean, you can get through this game very, very quickly, especially if we're only counting a single scenario.
You know, that's kind of a hallmark with Resident Evil games, because, you know, if you want to get that really good ranking, then you need to get through the game quickly. You know?
Right.
Usually it's like under 3 hours, I think. That gives you an S ranking.
Yeah, so you know there's an incentive to speedrun the shit, but even playing through the game normally, you know, it's a very fast experience. But again, you know, making that experience so that you have to play through it multiple times to really experience everything that the story has to offer. And on top of that, tying unlockables and things like that. I mean, it's really genius, actually. And back whenever, like you said, there wasn't DLC to pad out a game, you really needed to find ways to make players invested without having to do a lot, you know, and actually create so much data that's too much for the cartridge to handle. I mean, again, by having 4 different scenarios in the first place and then having the extra unlockable modes set in those same areas, you use your resources a lot more efficiently.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as like resource management is concerned, this game, like, apparently it gives you a lot of ink ribbons even in the normal mode for some reason. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's scarce on the ammo, but yeah, it gives you a lot of ways to save.
Well, in easy mode, it gives you a lot of fucking ammo and ink ribbons. But yeah, even on normal mode, like you said, the ink ribbons are pretty frequent. I found that even on normal, it gave me more than I needed.
And in the first game, I mean, that was one of those things that also really kind of heightened the tension, is like, oh my God, what if I run out of ink ribbons before I get to the next boss? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
what if I run out of the ability to save? I mean, nowadays with save states, that's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, and the way Resident Evil worked is every time you got to a new area, you know, a new typewriter, there was going to be an ink ribbon, or there would be an ink ribbon nearby.
Yeah.
This game actually makes it to where every new typewriter does have an ink ribbon, but this game also features a lot less backtracking. So, you know, you're actually going to, I think there probably are more save rooms in this game.
There are a few more save rooms, yeah.
So, you know, it's like, how many times are you going to go back to a single save room?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that even playing this game and being, you know, you don't even really have to be all that conservative with your saves. I kind of just, you know, like with any Resident Evil game that uses the ink ribbon system, I try not to save unless I've actually done something.
Yeah.
You know, or I've actually traveled to a new area that I haven't been before. But this game, you know, even if I didn't play that way, I probably wouldn't have that much difficulty.
Here's the way that I always approach the old school Resi games. It's like the first playthrough you go through, you don't do so to get a ranking. You do it mainly
Exactly.
to experience the story, to try to, you know, experience everything that it has to offer. And that means when I play through, like, I save and I save and I save and I save. As many times that I can save, I save.
Because you don't know necessarily whenever, you know, a boss or difficult enemy is going to pop up.
Exactly.
Like Mr. X.
Oh, yeah, especially when Mr. X shows up in the B scenario. I mean, you're going to be really wanting to make sure that you save in between save rooms, you know?
It keeps you on your toes because you're thinking, well, I kind of already know the layout of this place. Like, this isn't going to be a problem. I know what bosses are coming up. But you don't, you know, you'll have like Mr. X pop up out of nowhere, and that's terrifying. And once you learn that Mr. X is actually just a scripted enemy and he's not all that difficult to take down if you have enough ammunition. But up until you realize that after playing through the game a couple times, he's kind of terrifying. They play this really ominous music when he shows up, and you just think, oh, hell no.
Yo, exactly. You're totally just like, God damn it. He just busted through the goddamn wall and shit. And it's like, it's usually in a narrow corridor and everything to where you could barely just get around him.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I mean, it's very tense. I mean, he has a little bit of a delay in his attacks, because he's a bigger enemy. That's typically with games, the bigger the enemy, the slower the attack. But so, I mean, you can kind of, avoid him for the most part. You can avoid his attacks. But, I mean, when you're in those narrow corridors and hallways and whatnot, it's like, God damn, that's just ramped up to 11. And it's something that they kind of improved upon in Resident Evil 3 with Nemesis.
And in the Resident Evil 2 remake, they really improved on Mr. X and the whole, stalking behavior. But, we'll get into that, and I'm sure we'll talk about Resi 3 at some point as well, but I definitely think that Mr. X is underutilized, especially when you compare him to just where they've taken that type of character in future installments or versions. But I do think, during your first playthrough, it is a little bit terrifying. Like I said, it's the combination of the soundtrack and just the fact that here's this enemy that the first time you come across, you probably don't have enough equipment to take down. You're going to waste all of your ammo on him in a survival horror game. I mean, I can see that happening. I kind of knew who Mr. X was, and I knew, okay, I just need to leave. I just need to get the fuck out of here. I'm not even going to try. But can you imagine? Well, you probably did, playing this back in the day. And you just come across this enemy that's
especially since he comes up in the B scenario and you never really encountered him in the first time that you played the game. I mean, it was just kind of a surprise to just have this new enemy just plopped right into our lap like that. I mean, out of nowhere, and he's after something specific, which it turns out to be Sherry's pendant.
Right.
But I mean, yeah. I mean, when you're doing that first playthrough of both scenarios, no matter where you go with it, it's so surprising that just it was such a shock.
Yeah.
At that time.
Yeah, and he'll actually be the final character, the final, not the final boss, because there is another one, but I guess the penultimate boss of your B scenario.
Yeah.
Is going to be the Super Tyrant, and it's going to actually be being able to actually take him down in another form, which is, it's not really clear if that's supposed to be an upgrade or a downgrade, because, he's a lot more deadly, but he could actually be taken down, permanently.
Yeah.
But then again, that may just be because you have the fucking rocket launcher at the end.
Of course, which of course is a staple of the old Resi Evil games. It's like, oh yeah, you have to fucking shoot the final boss with a rocket launcher, and
that triple take.
That triple take. It always has to have the triple take before the tyrant blows up.
Hell yeah, that is just classic Resident Evil. I fucking love it, and the character has to say some cheesy line.
Oh, definitely, you have to.
Yeah, fucking awesome, man. And I think that's the part that just got me really excited, I think, when I was playing through this game. I started with Claire A, Leon B, because apparently that's the most canonical route.
Yeah.
Although, elements of both scenarios kind of exist in the canon, or both sets of scenarios. So it's really not clear. Of course, the remake kind of really changed things quite a bit with that. But anyway, it was just such a joy being able to experience that boss battle at the end of the B scenario. So, you're not even facing the same quote-unquote final boss that you were expecting. And then on top of that, they give you another final boss, which is the 5th stage of of Birkin.
Yeah, and that's in the train whenever he's just this big gelatinous monstrosity, just, turned into just an abomination, I mean, it doesn't, but thankfully he's very slow, so it doesn't take a whole lot to really take him down. Honestly, if you have the submachine gun at that point, and you just load him up a little bit with it, and maybe a few grenade shots, and maybe a shot from the rocket launcher if you still have one, it's he can be taken down. But
yeah. If you don't waste the other shot of your rocket launcher on a crowd of zombies,
yeah,
because you get 2 shots, one of them will automatically trigger a cutscene and kill the Super Tyrant.
As awesome as that would be, though,
Yeah, but you can actually that is something I think I did in the remake is I used the rocket on a crowd and it was fucking awesome.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And it was cool. But yeah, no, if you actually save that shot and you're smart about it, you'll have it to use and it'll chip away the final boss's health quite a bit, and then you just unload it on it with the submachine gun, which I think even if you didn't leave for your B scenario character is still you can still find it in the lab, and if you did already get it, then you get more bullets for it.
Yeah.
Which is nice. So I think no matter, I think you can get it in the lab. I think eventually. I'm not sure. I've always left it for my B scenario characters both times I played. So
see, I went ahead and just as Leon took both the knapsack and the machine gun. So
see, I realized that I would definitely need it more in the B scenario, which is supposed to be more difficult. And also, I knew that I only wanted to take one and leave it for the other. But now that I'm thinking about it, the submachine gun might be a good choice to give Claire early on because she doesn't have as good weaponry as Leon does.
Yeah, her main two weapons
other
are
than the grenade launcher.
Yeah, the grenade launcher and her pistol.
The grenade launcher is nice because it has so much versatility that you really don't have to use a lot of her other weapons. I mean, you typically will keep her handgun equipped, but it's like the bow gun is like, who uses that really? It actually is nice. I've equipped it a few times just because I had a bunch of ammo for it, and it's not a bad weapon, but it's definitely outclassed. And I think for her, the grenade launcher is really the one like defining thing. The spark shot's cool to use against I think. It's particularly strong against some of the bosses.
Yeah, but what's notable about the grenade launcher are the different rounds that were made for it. Like,
right.
You have acid rounds, which is pretty much good against any fleshy creature or anything like that. Usually the flame rounds are good against those plant monsters.
Yeah.
Usually. And also those are good. Those in the acid rounds are usually best to be used against, bosses.
Yeah, the flame rounds, I think, are superior to, for instance, Leon's flamethrower later on because, well, one, they're just another ammo type that you can carry with the weapon, and two, I just think that they're better. But that being said, Leon does get overall the better weapons. It's just that Claire's grenade launcher kind of compensates for that being such a good weapon. But Leon also gets the shotgun, and he gets the magnum, so...
That's true. But, I mean, I do like how... much like the shotgun and the grenade launcher, it can clear a room real quick because in this game, you're going to have a lot of zombies in one room from time to time. So, I mean, with Leon, you get that shotgun, it'll clear the room. But with Claire, I mean, you just got to lob a couple of grenades down the hall and, you can pretty much clear them out.
BIOHAZARD 2. And the game actually gives you a pretty decent amount of ammo, even on normal, actually. I mean, like I said, it was a little bit more scarce, but and there were certain times where, especially early on in the game, I was having difficulty, with enough ammo. But if you explore everything that the game has to offer and check out every area thoroughly, the game will kind of push you towards using certain types or stockpiling certain types for a certain area, and so I don't think ammo is really too big of a difficulty. I don't know if there's actually a harder mode that's unlockable.
I think there is actually. Yeah.
Or at least in some versions, because I would like to see a hard mode where ammo and ink ribbons are just a lot more scarce, giving you a lot more tension.
I mean, they were supposed to do that anyways, but I mean, like we said, I mean, there's that one little balance issue with the ink ribbons and whatnot. They're just not nearly as scarce as you would think they are.
No, and like I said, there are definitely times when you're playing normal where ammo can be tight, especially at the beginning. But like I said, if you're not wasting your ammo, which is hard to do in this game, and you're actually exploring everything, which is encouraged, you're going to stockpile the types of ammo that you need. And I think that the game being a little bit harder, or at least having a harder mode, would definitely be a bonus for me.
Yeah, I mean, but in a way, that's kind of what the extra modes are supposed to be as well. Like the For Survivor, and especially the tofu survivor. I mean, like I said, you just get a knife in that scenario.
People will do knife runs of this game too.
Oh,
so
they will, yeah.
All Resident Evil games.
Yeah. I mean, a knife run is kind of a rite of passage when it comes to Resi.
Yeah. I'm not there yet.
Yeah, you kind of need to get really, really experienced, get really good with those tank controls, and just know where your knife is slicing.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that is one of the things about these early Resident Evil games is that you didn't really get auto-aiming until Resident Evil 3. So these last two games, you had to be really precise with your
This
aiming.
one has auto-aiming.
Does it?
Yeah, you just have to turn it on.
No, I played it with it off, because that's just kind of the... I feel that that's the more classic way to play Resident Evil.
Okay.
Yeah,
I always kept it on because, it was just easier. And you still can manually aim, and you can decide whether you want to aim at their head or at their feet, but it does automatically point the character's gun at an enemy target, which is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is an auto-aiming mode, but you can decide whether you want to turn that on or off. But I just liked experimenting with all the different types of weapons and, just being able to find out what certain enemy types were going to be weak against or what was going to be better for different situations.
Yeah. Although, I mean, with Claire's weaponry, I would have liked to have seen some more modifications available for it.
She doesn't have any mods at all, does she?
Not really. I mean, it seems that Leon gets at least one or two of the mods. Like, I think there's a shotgun mod and there's a mod for his gun, the HKVP.
Yeah, I think the handgun, the shotgun, and the Magnum all get upgrades.
Yeah, they all have upgradable parts, but, those aren't guns that Claire really have. She doesn't get those guns.
No, she has her own handgun, but it doesn't have any mods that you can get in this game anyway.
No, I think it's just a standard issue duty pistol, I think.
Yeah. So, and early on, Leon's weaponry just severely outshines Claire because he starts with a better handgun, which can be modded pretty early, and he can get a shotgun very quickly, versus Claire's bow gun that you get early on in the game's story. But like you said, once you get the grenade launcher, then the difference between the characters is really just kind of play style. It's whether you're going to get up and close with the shotgun and take out swaths of enemies, or with a 3-round burst from your handgun, or with Claire, whether you're just going to clear entire hallways with her fucking grenades.
Exactly.
But I mean, for me, I guess I still was trying to approach it with the survival horror attitude, so I would try to save things for boss fights, and I try to clear most everything with the handgun or avoid fighting where possible. Because again, at its core, this game is a survival game. And while as long as you're not stupid, you'll have plenty of resources, there are ways to squander that. And I think that that's integral to the Resident Evil experience.
Well, it's integral to survival horror, period.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what you're supposed to do in these types of games. It's just as much about resource management as anything.
Right. And one character can get an upgrade to expand their inventory. And I'm not sure if it's only one character can get the submachine gun or both can, but I think in the lab the second character can, but it's not until the very end of the game.
Yeah.
Or if you just leave it for them. But that's what I was saying.
Damn it.
But yeah, I think that Resident Evil 2 just really nails a lot of that gameplay experience. Again, I think that the first one does a better job at being a survival horror tile, both in atmosphere and in, I think, the scarcity of resources. But I think, just as a video game, Resident Evil 2 outshines its predecessor in a lot of ways, and that's what a sequel should do.
Exactly. And I mean, it just has a better game design to it than the first one. It utilizes its cutscenes a lot better to tell the story.
Yeah, and you actually get a chance to play as two other characters in the game too, which is nice, other than the two that you can choose from.
Yeah, Ada Wong and Sherry Birkin.
Yeah.
And Ada Wong, I mean, she's kind of become this really kind of, mystical character, kind of, or really mythic character in the Resident Evil lore. I mean, because later it turns out that she was an Umbrella spy, like she was sent specifically to get the G virus and everything, and I mean, she became a fan favorite pretty quickly.
Yeah, she did. I mean, despite the fact that she and Leon have a very quick romantic progression, you still kind of are invested in it. You know, I like it, and I think Ada's just such a cool character. Definitely the better side character. Playing as Sherry is awful because she can't actually attack anybody.
No, but I mean, and she doesn't get attacked in the same way as the other characters, but I mean, who really wants to see a zombie munching down on a kid in a game, you know?
Right. So, you know, I think like the Sherry sections kind of slow down the pacing of Claire's scenario.
Although I do like the relationship between Claire and Sherry better than the relationship between Ada and Leon.
The relationship between Claire and Sherry is really nice. From a story perspective, I really enjoy it. But just playing as Sherry is just such a chore because there's not any actual combat. And it's not necessary. There's nothing really that having no combat introduces. There's like one puzzle that you solve as her.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It does feel like Ada's side quest or whatever. It seems a little more involved because she's able to fight against the enemies.
But even Ada's side mission, and playing as either of the characters, is not nearly as engaging as it is playing as the original cast. I mean, there's just a lot less to do. But at least Ada can actually attack other enemies, and you can check it out. I think her gun pretty much is just the same thing as Claire's gun, actually.
I think it is, yeah.
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 But it is, at least hers is a little bit more enjoyable. I actually like what they did with those two characters in the remake, which we'll talk about. But, I mean, overall, what did you think about the characters of Resident Evil 2?
I think that they're a little more three-dimensional than the characters of the first Resi game. I mean, the first Resi game, I mean, you still get to really get to know Jill and Chris and the STARS team members, but only to a point, you know?
Yeah, and they're all kind of the same type of character because they all have the same occupation.
Yeah, they're all members of the same team. They're all cops. They've all had, you know, lots of tactical training and whatnot. They're pretty much a special ops team for, you know, basically like a SWAT team.
Yeah.
You know, now compare that to Leon and Claire. I mean, Leon's a cop, but he's a rookie cop.
So does ACAB include Leon S. Kennedy?
I'm going to say yes.
Especially
Leon Kennedy. But, I mean, yeah, he doesn't have a whole lot of experience as far as, you know.
It's his first day on the job.
It's his first day on the job. He doesn't have experience as far as tactics, as far as, you know, he's a little more skilled with weaponry than Claire is. But Claire holds her own, though. I mean, and she doesn't seem to be particularly a trained shot or anything, but
it seems like she's held a gun before. Like maybe her brother had helped her.
That makes sense. I mean, she's still Chris's sister, you know? I mean, Chris is her brother, so yeah, there's going to be some. I'm sure she picked something up from him.
But she's just a civilian and he's a day one cop, so it's very different from each other and from the characters that she played as in the first game.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy that. I think that the characters are explored a little bit better because they have more interesting backgrounds and more distinctive backgrounds, I should say. But I also like how Resident Evil 2 takes itself a little bit more seriously. I mean, part of what's fun about the early Resident Evil games is the camp. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of cheesy dialogue in this game. I mean, that is just an unavoidable fact. But I do think that, you know, with the omission of like the live action scenes that they did in the beginning, this game does take itself a little bit more seriously than the first one did.
Definitely. I mean, there's so much about the original game's voice acting that by this point it's a meme, you know, like Jill's sandwich.
Yeah, and just that beginning intro is so much fucking fun.
It is, yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of cool that they were able to get some actors together and, you know, make them actually look like the characters and, you know, be able to do that. But that wasn't going to be particularly possible with Resi 2. I mean, that's why the use of cutscenes it's a lot stronger here, you know?
I think the story actually is improved as a result. Because of that, you know, and obviously it's going to be a completely different experience. There is something super fun about the original game and the vibe that it goes for, but I do like that this game does something different and takes itself a little bit more seriously, and that actually is a boon for the story.
Yeah, And it really helps sell the characters to the player, like you really do come to care about Claire and Leon and Sherry and Ada a lot more than you do, the members of the Stars team. I mean, I would argue that Resi 3 really helped, establish Jill as a better character.
Yeah.
But here, there's a reason why they went back to Leon for Resi 4 and they went with Claire for Resi Code Veronica. They're arguably the most compelling characters in the entire franchise.
I like that they actually did that. And that Resident Evil has, continued to follow protagonists in different ways. And so you can play Resident Evil 1, you can play Resident Evil 2, and it's like, hey, if you like playing as Jill, she comes back in Resident Evil 3. If you like playing as Leon, he comes back in 4. If you liked playing as Chris, he comes back in several of the later games.
Yeah, in 5.
In 5, okay. From 5. He's also, I think, and I know he's in Village.
In 6, he's definitely in Village, and he comes up he shows up near the end of Biohazard 7.
Yeah. But and then if you like Claire, she's a playable character in Code Veronica. So it's like, no matter what, I love how they continue to follow these characters and even kind of moving forward with the real progression of time.
Yeah. I really like what they did with Claire's story in Code Veronica, honestly.
I need to play more of that one. I started Code Veronica.
You really should. It actually goes a little more in depth into the origins of Umbrella.
Yeah.
A little more. Yeah, so it's a compelling story.
Yeah, I'm kind of really diving into the Resident Evil franchise as a result of the podcast, because I played through Biohazard and through Village when we did, episodes on those, and now I've played through the first game, at least the remake, and I've played a considerable way through the director's cut. I've played through both the original and remake of Resident Evil 2 extensively. I've played all 4 scenarios of this one. So, and I've started Code Veronica. I'm looking forward to the remake of 4 that's coming out.
Yeah, and you still got to play Resi 3 as well.
Yeah, and I think that's next on the list, actually, is I want to play through 3. I don't know about 5 or 6, because they're kind of the ones that nobody really talks about, or if they do, it's nothing good.
They're kind of the redheaded stepchildren of the franchise.
I'm sure they have their fans.
Yeah, but basically they're like the Silent Hill downpour, or the Silent Hill homecoming of the franchise.
Yeah.
But arguably Silent Hill has had far more stinkers in their lineup than Resi.
You know what's funny though is that where the best Silent Hill games, I think, are better than the best Resident Evil games.
Really? You think so?
I think I like Silent Hill just a little bit more, but I haven't actually played that much into it either. But just from what I have played, I think I like Silent Hill 2 better than I like the early Resident Evil games.
That's understandable. Silent Hill 2 is a much more contained story, and it's driven a lot more by metaphor and whatnot.
I think I'm digging that. I think it's more scary, too.
Yeah, it's a lot scarier because of that psychological element, whereas this right here, it's just more like a corporate conspiracy that leads to a world apocalypse.
Yeah.
So,
but I think that there is something that's very fun about Resident Evil, and it's a flavor that needs to always exist. And it's a flavor that I'm always going to have part of my heart in, because I really haven't actually invested quite a bit of time in this series, even recently, just within the span of the last couple of years or so.
Yeah.
And it's really hooked me in. And I think out of all of the games that I played so far, I think Resident Evil 2 did that the best. I was, invested in doing everything that this game had to offer, and I still haven't done that.
Yeah, you still need to get to Tofu.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, how interested I am in stuff like that, but I guess, I do kind of want to play with infinite guns and whatnot, and kind of really experience that,
and unlock some of the costumes as well. You got to do that, because
I've never been a fan of speedrunning, but with Resident Evil though, there is also this sort of logical progression, and it feels like there's an efficient way to go about that.
Yeah, and it goes back to that zapping system and how they laid out the design of the game. I mean, that's why this is such a popular game for, especially these first two Resident Evil games are very popular with speedrunners, like especially with like randomizer mods and everything. Like, oh yeah, you should see some of these guys streaming with a randomizer mod on RE2 or RE. Director's cut, man, because like it'll randomize the dialogue even. Like, I mean, you'll just have random snippets from like different Resident Evil games come up.
Some of the other versions of this game have featured like different arranged modes where they do randomize the position of items, which is cool.
Yeah.
But you can also, see that within the mod community.
This isn't just randomizing item placement. This is randomizing the items themselves.
Yeah,
like,
that's a whole other level.
Yeah. Like you go up there and it looks like you're going to pick up a key, but you end up picking up an ink ribbon.
Yeah.
Shit like that.
Yeah, that's actually hilarious. And I mean, there's just so much to do. And the original Resident Evil 2 is not easily found these days.
Unfortunately, and which is
so you're probably just gonna have to emulate it,
which is crazy because it came out on quite a few platforms. I mean, you can find it on Dreamcast, you can find it on N64 even. I mean, it was ported to what else was it ported to? I think there's a version of it even on the Nintendo Wii.
Yeah,
like I mean.
I'm sure it's probably not that hard to track down a copy if you have the hardware, but this game isn't on like any digital stores right now.
Yeah.
And it's not really going to be playable on any like console hardware as of recent, but you can emulate it fairly easily. I mean, Beau's got it on his PlayStation Classic, and I played it on my computer.
Yeah,
I played it both ways. I think that there are definitely ways to go about this game, and it's been around long enough that it's not that hard to do. So I definitely recommend this wholeheartedly. And I gotta say, and we'll talk about this in the remake. This is another situation where I think you kind of have to play both. I mean, they're different experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't really gotten into the remake that much. But for what I've seen of it, I mean, it seems to retain a lot of what made this game, as memorable as it is.
I have basically one major gripe about it, and we'll talk about that. And I mentioned it before, but
yeah.
But other than that, I mean, I think that it's almost the superior game. But there is also just something very timeless about the original experience that I think no amount of remakes, could ever change.
Absolutely not. And it's very specific to just that particular era of gaming.
Yeah, I mean even when it comes down to like the soundtrack.
Exactly. I mean, and by the way, I love Resident Evil save music. That's something that I jam a lot at work even, like just when I'm working, it's very calming. And this has like some of the creepiest music, but also very minimalist music.
Yeah.
Very, very minimalist, even more so than the first game.
Yeah, it is a fucking fantastic soundtrack. It's very memorable. The save room music, the main hall music, some of the more ominous themes that play through different areas. It's just, there's a whole aesthetic to it, and the soundtrack really makes that.
Yeah. And then there's just the graphics, which at the time was such an improvement on the original, Yeah. Much more detailed. You actually had different zombies. You had male and female zombies, and some of them would be cops, some of them would be civilians. And even the design of something like the liquor. There's a reason why the liquor is far more remembered than like the hunters. The hunters in the original game, like they were terrifying in their own way, but there's just something about the liquors that are just really visceral and just really just gross, like it almost feels like it had like an exoskeleton that it got rid of or molted or something.
Well, in just terms of design and behavior, the liquors are way more terrifying. In fact, I'd argue the hunters aren't scary, except for the fact that they're just very tough enemies that can kill you very easily, that can come out of nowhere. But other than that, I mean, they're just kind of big, goofy green monsters. The lickers are genuinely terrifying.
Yeah, especially because they can actually climb on walls and ceilings and everything. I mean, they can drop right on top of you. They can attack you from the side. It's like they took everything that was difficult about the spiders, about the giant spiders, which are in this game, like everything about the spiders and also everything about the hunters, and just kind of combine them. a little bit, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And there is a way to get around them if you move, slowly, but it's not guaranteed. You might step on something that I think, like, if you step on the glass, it actually will alert it. If you try to run, they're going to hear you because they're blind, but it just just adds another aspect to this type of enemy because you think, I might want to sneak around this.
Yeah.
Of course, with the white weaponry, which you can get fairly early on, they're not really that big of a challenge. But even so, the first time you come across one, you're like, what the fuck?
Hell, just a couple of acid rounds will take them down real quick.
And then later on in the game, they'll throw like 2 or 3 of them at you at once, or like super lickers. And so, yeah, they actually can kill you very quickly, even late game.
Yeah, no kidding.
You really got to go in there with the strategy, and then that's the best thing. And I think there's a lot of trial and error. You walk into a room and you're like, oh shit, there's a boss here. All right, let me reload, equip myself right.
Yeah, you definitely want to do that in this game.
Yeah, and I think like we talked about with Final Fantasy VII, the idea of using 3D models on these pre-rendered backgrounds is just kind of what adds to the entire aesthetic.
It really does.
It allows Resident Evil to tell a story in only a way that a classic Resident Evil game could.
Yeah.
And with those camera angles that just change and the tank controls that take quite a bit of getting used to.
I would argue that they're slightly more fine-tuned in this game.
Yeah.
Slightly than before.
Well, and you have to remember that the whole point is that it's disorienting. They're doing that on purpose. They're shifting camera angles really quickly and using hard-to-master controls because it makes the experience more terrifying. It kind of replicates, for instance, what it might be from the character's perspective of maybe not being able to move around or attack accurately because they're scared or they're in tense situations.
Yeah.
I think that it's a good way, and I think the early Resident Evil games really actually evoke that experience well. It does make the game just a little bit scarier when you got to get away from this enemy, but your character just isn't quite cooperating because it's difficult to turn them and move them and have them run all at the same time.
Yeah, there's no doubt that that's deliberate, and that's always been the case with Resident Evil controls, I mean, I would argue that with Resident Evil 4, I mean, that's why the controls were designed the way they were in that one. It was to kind of add to that heightened tension. There's a reason why even when you aim and you can still kind of move around a little bit, it's like you're still limited in your movement and everything. It's meant to up that tension.
Yeah, I think there is something very deliberate about, especially the early Resident Evil titles with that, and it's why this series just definitely has its own brand and of survival horror, and obviously being influential to the genre as a whole, but even into the modern day continues to have its own distinctive self.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why they had to turn around and go back to the survival horror mechanic in order to make the new Resident Evil games like the new memorable games in the franchise.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
It has its own identity, and Resident Evil 2, I think, really has its own identity within the franchise as well.
Yeah.
There's a reason it's a lot of people's favorite title.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think about how I would rank the games that I've played so far, and it's difficult. It's like I kind of feel like I need to play through like Biohazard or Village again.
Yeah. It's probably a good idea.
Because it's like, do I like that one better or like the original game? I'm like, kind of need to get through the original PS1 version and see just how that falls on my palate. But I think that this is a phenomenal series. I think this is a phenomenal game, and I'm excited to talk about the series in a little bit more detail. I mean, I guess it's now as good a time as any to kind of get into our final thoughts here.
Man, I mean, this is once again another game that's very nostalgic for me. Much like Final Fantasy VII, the Resident Evil series was when gaming officially grew up, and this game really kind of signified that. I mean, like you said, it's a much more mature, less campy version of survival horror, and it really set the tone for the next 3 or 4 games that came out. Now, of course, they totally shot themselves in the foot around 5 and 6, Mm-hmm. They shot themselves in the foot there.
And some of the spin-offs.
Oh, yeah, some of the spin-offs, of course. I mean, Resident Evil Outbreak, yeah, it's easy to forget that they made an online multiplayer Resident Evil game.
Most of the spin-offs, I should say, actually. Code Veronica is good, but it's like the Revelations games I've heard are good.
I wouldn't even call Code Veronica a spin-off game. It's more of just a branching off of the Resident Evil timeline, more or less. Kind of like how, Leon's story in Resident Evil 4 is kind of a branch off of that.
Yeah, a lot of people say that it's different. I've just barely gotten into it, but I agree with you, man. It is it's a fun series through its ups and downs.
It is. Like, even the worst Resident Evil game is still very playable. I mean, we played Resident Evil Survivor that one time. That is one of the worst ones, but I mean, it's still a fun little game to get through, At its core, I mean, it was trying something different. And they kind of got that mechanic right in a later game. I think it was a Deadly Aim, I think it was. But, I mean, yeah, this is definitely a game that was a lot of fun revisiting. Like, I love playing these old school PlayStation horror games. Like, there's an entire genre of indie horror game development right now that's surrounded around making these old school retro looking horror games and using the tank controls and
polygonal
models and pre-rendered backgrounds and all of that. It's like that style's still being replicated to this day. So I mean, this game's influence is very, very relevant to this day.
I agree. Yeah Resident Evil 2 I think is it deserves its place in memorable, influential video games. And I'm glad that I was able to experience that not just once, but 4 times and still have a unique experience every time. And it's crazy that I kind of want to play more,
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind playing through it again, to tell the truth.
Honestly. So, I mean, Resident Evil 2, I think, is definitely a hallmark. Definitely, I think, important to the genre of survival horror in the video game industry today.
And important to gaming, yeah. Like how we talked about how, Final Fantasy VII really pushed the boundaries further as far as, cinematic storytelling and gaming. This one right here is another one of those games that really pushed that forward. I mean, just the way its narrative was presented, the way that cutscenes were utilized and everything. I mean, it's very similar to FF7 in that respect.
Yeah, I agree. These are a good couple episodes to kind of do back to back, because
exactly,
and especially because we're talking about both the original and the remake. So yeah, next time we'll get into Resident Evil 2 2019. Again, this is also a fantastic game that I really only have one gripe about it. We'll talk about that, and I think that the source material was fantastic as well. So we've got some more stuff planned for Spooky Month. Still trying to kind of figure out what specifically is going to be like the Halloween episode versus what are our numbered episodes this month. So we're still kind of working that out, but I would actually like to get into the Resident Evil franchise a little bit more. We're actually going to be doing a collaboration with Collateral Cinema.
Exactly. We're going to be talking about the first Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil movie with Mila Jovovich. And also, I think we're going to do Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City as well. It's just going to be a little 2-part review.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. So, and I think the plan right now is that we're going to be doing Clock Tower as our actual Halloween special. So stay tuned for that. That is most likely what we're still doing.
I think we should just go ahead and do director's cut, the Resident Evil director's cut.
Well, we are doing that. That's going to be our bonus round episode.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah.
All right.
So, and I would also like to get into the Resident Evil Village DLC.
Yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be on the list.
Hell yeah. So, Spooky Month. Happy Halloween to everybody, and happy season 5 of Collateral Gaming. Can't believe we're here. What can we expect with season 6 of Collateral Cinema that just started?
Well, of course, we have our Human Centipede episode, the season premiere with Juliet Miranda guesting. That is still up and available right now. But coming this next coming Friday, we are releasing our episode on the Monster Squad, which is just another one of those classic Halloween movies. You know, everyone loves to put it on. You know, it's a little bit of an anomaly when it comes to 80s kids movies and everything, but very interesting episode that we did on it. You know, so look for that. And yeah, I mean, like I said, we're going to do the director's cut episode on those 2 Resident Evil movies as well. So look for that. And yeah, I mean, our next season is going to be very interesting.
Hell yeah,
This
I'm
season's
really
gonna be-
excited, man.
This is the fun season of Collateral Cinema. So
Yeah.
yeah, and we are doing Halloween Ends. That's going to be our Halloween special. We're going to be doing that with Film Rage. I mean, we're going to be recording that on Tuesday. So yeah, we're going to watch the movie on Peacock, and we're going to sit down and review it. And I mean, I'm hearing some mixed things about it, but we'll get into it. So
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, actually, today's the day that we are able to watch it, that it's streaming as of recording this. So we just didn't get Robert here, and I think that's kind of what we were waiting on.
Yeah, we wanted to watch it with Robert, but yeah, well,
Well, folks, if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also check out our Patreon, where we have exclusive Let's Play video game commentaries, and we are going to be adding to that as soon as I have the hardware to make it happen. Since I fixed my PS4 and my fan issue, and, you know, a little bit of personal news. I fixed it. I opened it up, came at it with some compressed air. When I ran out of compressed air, I just used everything at my disposal. Cotton swabs.
yeah, damn.
But I cleaned out my PS4, and so now we might be able to record some commentaries on that, which will be nice. I can just use the PS4's in-game recording option, although we may run into issues with that. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, and check us out on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Yep, same for Collateral Cinema.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's really all that we have to say. That being said, I'm Ashley Chancellor.
And I'm Beau Maddox.
This has been Collateral Gaming. We are out.
Out.
Collateral Gaming is a Collateral Media podcast. All music and game clips are owned by their respective creators and are used for educational purposes only. Please don't sue us. We're poor.